After the evening service, Johnson said, "Come, you shall go home with me and sit just an hour." But he was better than his word, for after we had drunk tea with Mrs. Williams, he asked me to go up to his study with him, where we sat a long while together in a serene, undisturbed frame of mind, sometimes in silence and sometimes conversing, as we felt ourselves inclined, or more properly speaking, as he was inclined. For during all the courses of my long intimacy with him, my respectful attention never abated, and my wish to hear him was such that I constantly watched every dawning of communication from that great and illuminated mind. He observed, "All knowledge is of itself of some value. There is nothing so minute or inconsiderable that I would not rather know it than not. In the same manner, all power of whatever sort is of itself desirable. A man would not submit to learn to hem a ruffle, or of his wife, or his wife's maid, but if a mere wish could attain it, he would rather wish to be able to hem a ruffle." He again advised me to keep a journal fully and minutely, but not to mention such trifle as that meat was too much or too little done, or that the weather was fair or rainy. He had, till very near his death, a contempt for the notion that the weather affects the human frame. That's been brought up before, you'll recall. I disagree with that, of course. I told him that our friend Goldsmith had said to me that he had come too late into this world, for that Pope and other poets had taken up the places in the Temple of Fame, so that, as but a few at any period can possess poetical reputation, a man of genius can now hardly acquire it. Johnson answered, "That is one of the most sensible things I have ever heard of Goldsmith. It is difficult to get literary fame, and it is every day growing more difficult. Ah, sir, that should make a man think of securing happiness in another world, which all who try sincerely for it may attain. In comparison of that, how little are all the other things. The belief of immortality is impressed upon all men, and all men act under an impression of it, however they may talk, and though perhaps they may be scarcely sensible of it." I said it appeared to me that some people had not the least notion of immortality, and I mentioned a distinguished gentleman of our acquaintance. Footnote here tells us this is Fox. Johnson answered, "Sir, if it were not for the notion of immortality, he would cut a throat to fill his pockets." When I quoted this to Beauclerk, who knew much more of this gentleman than we did, he said in his acid manner, "He would cut a throat to fill his pockets if it were not for fear of being hanged." Dr. Johnson proceeded, "Sir, there's a great cry about infidelity, but there are in reality very few infidels. I have heard a person, originally a Quaker, but now I am afraid a Deist," later footnote tells us this is Dr. Brocklesby, "say that he did not believe there were in all England above 200 infidels." Johnson was pleased to say, "If you come to settle here, we will have one day of the week in which we will meet by ourselves. That is the happiest conversation where there is no competition, no vanity, but a calm, quiet interchange of sentiments." In his private register this evening it is thus marked, quote, "Boswell sat with me till night. We had some serious talk." It also appears from the same record that after I left him he was occupied in religious duties, in, quote, "giving Francis, his servant, some direction for preparing to communicate, in reviewing his life and resolving on better conduct." The humility and piety which he discovers on such occasions is truly edifying. No saint, however, in the course of his religious warfare, was more sensible of the unhappy failures of pious resolves than Johnson. He said one day, talking to an acquaintance, later footnote tells us this is probably Boswell, on the subject, quote, "Sir, hell is paved with good intentions." Footnote here. This is a proverbial sentence. Hell, says Herbert, is full of good meaning and wishings. From Jacula Prudentum, page 11, 1651 edition. On Sunday, April 16th, being Easter Day, after having attended the solemn services at St. Paul's, I dined with Dr. Johnson and Mrs. Williams. I maintain that Horace was wrong in placing happiness in nil admirari, for that I thought admiration one of the most agreeable of all our feelings, and I regretted that I had lost much of my disposition to admire, which people generally do as they advance in life. Johnson answered, Sir, as a man advances in life, he gets what is better than admiration, judgment, to estimate things as their true value. I still insisted that admiration was more pleasing than judgment, as love is more pleasing than friendship. The feeling of friendship is like that of being comfortably filled with roast beef, love like being enlivened with champagne. Johnson answered, No, sir, admiration and love are like being intoxicated with champagne, judgment and friendship like being enlivened. Waller has hit upon the same thought with you, but I don't believe you have borrowed from Waller. I wish you would enable yourself to borrow more. There's a footnote here that's, I believe, Waller's poetry. A mort is sweet and good as the most delicious food, which but tasted does impart life and gladness to the heart. Sachariz's beauty wine, which to madness does incline, such a liquor as no brain that is mortal can sustain. That's the poem. And then there's a footer here that says not to admire, which is what nil admirari meant back there. And that's from Horace. Johnson then took occasion to enlarge on the advantage of reading, and combated the idle superficial notion that knowledge enough may be acquired in conversation. The foundation, said he, must be laid by reading. General principles must be had from books, which, however, must be brought to the test of real life. In conversation you never get a system. What is said upon a subject is to be gathered from 100 people. The parts of a truth which a man gets thus are at such a distance from each other that he never attains to a full view. Now we have a letter. To Bennet Langton, Esquire. Dear Sir, I have inquired more minutely about the medicine for the rheumatism, which I am sorry to hear that you still want. The receipt is this. Take equal quantities of flour of sulfur and flour of mustard seed. Make them an electuary with honey or treacle. And take a bolus as big as a nutmeg several times a day, as you can bear it, drinking after it a quarter of a pint of the infusion of the root of lovage. Lovage in Ray's nomenclature is levisticum. Perhaps the botanist may know the Latin name. Of this medicine I pretend not to judge. There is all the appearance of its efficacy, which a single instance can afford. The patient was very old, the pain very violent, and the relief, I think, speedy and lasting. My opinion of alternative medicine is not high, but quid testaci nocebit? It can do no harm to try. If it does harm, or does no good, it may be omitted. But that it may do good, you have, I hope, reason to think it desired by, Sir, your most affectionate, humble servant, April 17th, 1775, Sam Johnson. Well, somebody should try that out if they have rheumatism. Maybe it's the way to go. On Tuesday, April 18th, Johnson and I were engaged to go with Sir Joshua Reynolds to dine with Mr. Cambridge at his beautiful villa on the banks of the Thames near Twickenham. Dr. Johnson's tardiness was such that Sir Joshua, who had an appointment at Richmond early in the day, was obliged to go by himself on horseback, leaving his coach to Johnson and me. Johnson was in such good spirits that everything seemed to please him as we drove along. Our conversation turned on a variety of subjects. He thought portrait painting an improper employment for a woman. Public practice of any art, Johnson observed, and staring in men's faces is very indelicate in a female. I happened to start a question of propriety, whether, when a man knows that some of his intimate friends are invited to the house of another friend with whom they are all equally intimate, he may join them without an invitation. This is some Miss Manners stuff. Johnson said, "No, sir, he is not to go when he is not invited. They may be invited on purpose to abuse him." He smiled at this. As a curious instance how little a man knows or wishes to know, Johnson's own character in the world, as a curious instance of how little a man knows or wishes to know a man's own character in the world, or rather, as a convincing proof that Johnson's roughness was only external and did not proceed from his heart, I insert the following dialogue. Johnson said, "It is wonderful, sir, how rare a quality good humor is in life. We meet with very few good-humored men. I mentioned 4 of our friends." Later footnote tells us this is Reynolds, Burke, Beauclerk, Acid, and Langton, Muddy. I guess it'll all make sense in a second what that means. I mentioned 4 of our friends, none of whom he would allow to be good-humored. One was Acid, that would be Beauclerk. Another was Muddy, that would be Langton. And 2 of the others he had objections which have escaped me. Then, shaking his head and stretching himself at his ease in the couch, and smiling with such complacency, he turned to me and said, "I look upon myself as a good-humored fellow." The epithet fellow applied to the great lexicographer, the stately moralist, the masterly critic, as if he had been Sam Johnson, a mere pleasant companion, was highly diverting. And this light notion of himself struck me with wonder. I answered, also smiling, No, sir, that will not do. You are good-natured, but not good-humored. You are irascible. You have not patience with folly and absurdity. I believe you would pardon them if there was time to deprecate your vengeance. But punishment follows so quick after sentence that they cannot escape. I had brought with me a great bundle of Scotch magazines and newspapers in which his journey to the Western Isles was attacked in every mode, and I read a great part of them to him, knowing they would afford him entertainment. I wish the writers of them had been present. They would have been sufficiently vexed. One ludicrous imitation of his style by Mr. Maclaurin, now one of the Scotch judges, with the title of Lord Dreghorn, was distinguished by him from the rude mass. "This," said Johnson, "is the best, but I could caricature my own style much better myself." He defended his remark upon the general insufficiency of education in Scotland, and confirmed to me the authenticity of his witty saying of the learning of the Scotch, quote, "Their learning is like bread in a besieged town. Every man gets a little, but no man gets a full meal." "There is," said Johnson, "in Scotland a diffusion of learning, a certain portion of it widely and thinly spread. A merchant there has as much learning as one of their clergy." He talked of Isaac Walton's Lives, which was one of his most favorite books. Dr. Donne's life, he said, was the most perfect of them. He observed that it was wonderful that Walton, who was in a very low situation in life, should have been familiarly received by so many great men, and then at a time when the ranks of society were kept more separate than they are now. He supposed that Walton had then given up his business as a linen draper and sempster, and was only an author, and added that he was a great panegyrist. I said, "No quality will get a man more friends than a disposition to admire the qualities of others. I do not mean flattery, but a sincere admiration." Johnson answered, Nay, sir, flattery pleases very generally. In the first place, the flatterer may think what he says to be true, but in the second place, whether he thinks so or not, he certainly thinks those whom he flatters of consequence enough to be flattered. No sooner had we made our bow to Mr. Cambridge in his library than Johnson ran eagerly to one side of the room, intent on poring over the backs of the books. Sir Joshua observed, I've sighed, he runs to the books as I do to the pictures, but I have the advantage. I can see much more of the pictures than he can of the books. Mr. Cambridge upon this politely said, Dr. Johnson, I am going, with your pardon, to accuse myself, for I have the same custom which I perceive you have. But it seems odd that one should have such a desire to look at the backs of books. Johnson, ever ready for contests, instantly started from his reverie, wheeled about, and answered, Sir, the reason is very plain. Knowledge is of two kinds. We know a subject ourselves, or we know where we can find information upon it. When we inquire into any subject, the first thing we have to do is to know what books have treated of it. This leads us to look at catalogues and at the backs of books in the libraries. Sir Joshua observed to me the extraordinary promptitude with which Johnson flew upon an argument. Yes, said I, he has no formal preparation, no flourishing with his sword. He is through your body in an instant. Johnson was here solaced with an elegant entertainment, very accomplished family, and much good company, among whom was Mr. Harris of Salisbury, who paid him many compliments on his journey to the Western Islands. The common remark as to the utility of reading history being made, Johnson answered, We must consider how very little history there is. I mean real authentic history. That certain kings reigned and certain battles were fought, we can depend upon as true. But all the coloring, all the philosophy of history is conjecture. I said, Then, sir, you would reduce all history to no better than an almanac, a mere chronological series of remarkable events. Mr. Gibbon, who must at that time have been employed upon his history, of which he published the first volume in the following year, was present, but did not step forth in defense of that species of writing. He probably did not like to trust himself with Johnston. Says here, see page 615. Well, just for shits and giggles, let's check out what's happening on 615. That wasn't that long ago. Maybe I'll remember. Alright, what's going on 615? Who's this again? Mr. Gibbon. Alright, is Mr. Gibbon on this page? They're talking about Ocean on this page, and the bear. Gibbon muttered in a low tone of voice, I should not like to trust myself with you. Okay, so that's why, because he remembered something happened on this back then. This is when they're referring to Johnson as a bear, I believe. And Gibbon learned something from that conversation he was overhearing to not fuck around with Johnson, I believe. I just kind of skimmed it for a second. I don't know if I'm entirely true, but close enough. Johnson observed that the force of our early habits was so great that though reason approved, nay, though our senses relished a different course, almost every man returned to them. I do not believe there is any observation upon human nature better founded than this, and in many cases it is a very painful truth, for where early habits have been mean and wretched, the joy and elevation resulting from better modes of life must be damped by the gloomy consciousness of being under an almost inevitable doom to sink back into the situation which we recollect with disgust. It surely may be prevented by constant attention and unremitting exertion to establish contrary habits of superior efficacy. The Beggar's Opera and the common question whether it was pernicious in its effects having been introduced, Johnson answered, As to this matter, which has been very much contested, I myself am of opinion that more influence has been ascribed to the Beggar's Opera than it in reality ever had. For I do not believe that any man was ever made a rogue by being present at its representation. At the same time, I do not deny that it may have some influence by making the characters of a rogue familiar and in some degree pleasing. Then, collecting himself, as it were, to give a heavy stroke, there is in it such a labification of all principles as may be injurious to morality. Footnote here about it being pleasing. A very eminent physician, later footnote tells us this is perhaps Sir John Pringle, whose discernment is as acute and penetrating in judgment of the human character as it is in its own profession, remarked once at a club where I was that a lively young man, fond of pleasure and without money, would hardly resist a solicitation from his mistress to go upon the highway immediately after being present at the representation of the Beggar's Opera. I have been told of an ingenious observation by Mr. Gibbon that, quote, the Beggar's Opera may, perhaps, have sometimes increased the number of highwaymen, but that it has been a beneficial effect in refining that class of men, making them less ferocious, more polite, in short, more like gentlemen. Upon this, Mr. Courtenay said that Gay was the Orpheus of highwaymen. Well, perhaps I'll read up what this Beggar's Opera is now, because I'm not familiar with it. It's reminding me of Adamant, though. Anyway, till next time, bye from Boswell.